down, thanks.
Yeah.
Tony, right?
Yes, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, I'm Joe, and I'm just looking for the window. I see it now. Yeah.
Shabbat Shalom, Joe.
Shabbat Shalom. Hi.
Camera is on.
Yeah,
mic is on.
Oh, yay! That's exciting.
Moshe doesn't have a partner. Just Sarah on the bottom, right?
Yeah.
The pieces for the window themselves are the middle ones, obviously. We put the outside thing with the, we put the outside in.
It is it's a spectacular piece, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we have it lit. It's kind of
Yeah.
nice.
Oh, where?
Whoops.
And it's from a time apparently when people were taller.
That's good, that's big.
I thought I couldn't find, okay, I couldn't find it at the last minute, basically, but I had a picture of the original.
How are you?
Oh, I just want to say hello to you, Frank. How are you doing?
Is this the first time that we've been back in this?
Gates never say hello to people she knows.
Oh, and there is a little
Well,
window.
I kind of recognize you. Sometimes it's kind of tricky to.
Yeah, there's the big one.
And the big one.
Services.
Huh? I said, there's a little window. And he said, and there's the big one.
Indeed, indeed. Frank, did you get to see
I
Joe?
did, thank you.
Awesome. All right, Tony, ready when you are.
Well, anyway, it's really, it looks really good.
Do I need that book? Yeah, I'll get that one. Good one, too. Good morning, everybody, and welcome.
Good morning.
I'll begin with Macho Vim on page 141. Macho Vim, Michenotzecha Yisrael. Matovu Alecha Yaakov, Michenotzecha Yisrael. Yai, nai, 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 nai,
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to those that are here and those who are watching and streaming. We have a minion. It's a small group today because the weather was probably so nice. Everybody decided to pray in the sunlight. I'd like to make sure we all introduce each other. It's hard enough to figure out who people are like this. It's even harder when we are only seeing eyes. I'm Harriet Saperstein. I'm a long time and almost the founder of RCD. That's because it started in the summer and we were in England for the year. But then we came back, and we are members of Tafia, RCD, the Downtown Synagogue, EIADS, and the Grosse Pointe Jewish Council, just to make sure that Jewish continuity continues. Okay, so thank you.
Hi,
Mike.
I'm Tony Dilloff. I'm a member of RCD. I have the title of Treasurer for Life, it seems. I live just around the corner from here, and I have to apologize that last night I was involved in a singing engagement of a sort, and I have a little soreness of throat because of that tonight. I also have another one, so I probably will try to limit the amount of vocalizing I do.
Ariana Silverman, I have the privilege of serving as a rabbi for the Downtown Synagogue.
David Powell, privilege of serving the Downtown Synagogue too, as no member of the board.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, Sam Wall. I am also privileged to be at the Downtown Synagogue and on the board.
And the president.
And the president.
And a neighbor of Tony and mine.
Yes.
The greatest privilege of all.
Okay.
Godly.
I am Gabri Harris, privileged of being the musician in residence at the Downtown Synagogue.
I'm Jen Kessler.
Frank Castronova, member of the Downtown Synagogue and Temple Emmanuel.
I'm Joe Lewis. That's it.
We're members of the Downtown
Oh, yes.
Synagogue and also Gus Alone, and we live in the Park Shelton near the
What's
DIA.
your name?
I'm Bobby.
Rachel Rudman, I'm the executive director at Downtown Synagogue.
Wonderful. So we'd like to, of course, welcome you all to the RCD Sanctuary. It's the first time we've been down here in many a moon. That's our great window over there. Usually it's not a window against the wall, but standing in this, standing proudly in this corner over there. And we hope to return it to its usual spot in the not distant future.
Okay. And that comes from Mogan Abraham, which was the synagogue on the north side of the DIA that was torn down, and it was rescued by Carl Levin. Okay? All right.
Apocryphally.
Right. Good. Okay, page 743, and I would like a volunteer to read this Sanskrit proverb to look at this day. No one comes then, okay.
Look at this day, for it is life, the very life of life. In its brief course lie all the realities and verities of existence, the bliss of growth, the splendor of action, the glory of power. For yesterday is but a dream, and tomorrow is only a vision. But today, well lived, makes every yesterday a dream of happiness and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day.
Thank you. For those people who would like to wear a tallit or to have the prayer for the tallis, on page 142. Sam, could you help us with that, please?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lihitataf b'tzitzit.
Amen.
152 is the morning praises, and we like to do that as volunteers. I'll start. You can do that in English or Hebrew. Blessed are you, awakener our God, life of all the worlds, who removes sleep from my eyes and slumber from my eyelids.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu chei ha'olamim, hanoten l'sachvi bina lehavchim ben yom uben laila.
Blessed are you, the fashioner, our God, life of all the worlds, who stretches forth the earth upon the waters.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולמים פוקח עברים.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu chei ha'olamim v'yisharumim.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu chei ha'olamim matir asurim.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu chai ha'olam sokei kifufim.
Blessed are you, the way, our God, life of all the worlds, who makes firm a person's steps.
Blessed are you, the generous, our God, life of all the worlds, who acts for all my needs. Blessed are you, the mighty one, our God, life of all the worlds, who girds Israel with strength.
Blessed are you, the beautiful, our God, life of all the worlds, who crowns Israel with splendor.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu chei ha'olamim she'asani b'tzalmo.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu chei ha'olamim she'asani bat chorim.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu chei ha'olamim she'asani Israel.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו חי העולמים הנותן לה כוח.
Everybody? Blessed are you, the architect, our God, the sovereign of all worlds, who shaped the human being with wisdom, making for us all the openings and vessels of the body. It is revealed and known before your throne of glory that if one of these passageways be open when it should be closed, or blocked up when it should be free, one could not stay alive or stand before you. Blessed are you, miraculous, the wondrous healer of all flesh. Okay?
Amen.
Amen.
Now, please turn to page 231 for Hallelujah.
Everyone help us.
Hallelujah, 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 take us so far. Hallelujah, never let me know. Hallelujah, betoko machom. Hallelujah, believe berukah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 till to let from heart. Hallelujah, till to let go.
here will do the hot seat Kaddish for us.
Amen. Hayo hon, the mayor hon, the Haye Bekoba Israel, Pagalavus Mankori, Bimaru.
Amen.
It's Boravis, the Babis, Boravis, Romanis, Nase, Vitadar, Vitale, Vitalaus, the Made Kudishal, the Elam Mekober, Hata, Visarata, Tuspihata, Benimata, Damiran, Yamal, Bimaru.
Amen.
Turning to 247, if we, congregation as a whole, and if we would stand, we can face west instead of east. Okay. Baruch et Adonai Hamvarat. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, yotzer otorei, hoshei hoshei shalom, u'rei et hakol.
Amen.
275. We get another song. We don't let you sit down this time, do we? I want to make this kind of musical. Okay?
Baruch atah Adonai, Evamo Yisrael.
277. I don't want to.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shem Kavod Malchuto Ve'olam Va'ed. Oh, give your melody, right?
Okay. You can need to chant it. Why don't you read that for us?
Okay. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levacha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha v'hayu ha'dvarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shchinatam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shmitzecha b'beitecha וברכך בדרך, ושבתך וקומך, ושרת מאוד על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בעיניך, וכתבתם, המזוזות ביתך ובשעריך.
Continuing on page 278. It came to pass and will again, that if you truly listen to the voice of the Eternal One, your God, be sure to do whatever has been asked of you today. The One, your God, will make of you a model for all nations of the earth, and there will come upon you all these blessings as you listen to the call of the Abundant One, your God. Blessed be you in the city. Blessed be you upon the field. Blessed be the fruit of your womb, the fruit of your land, the fruit of your cattle, the calving of your oxen and the lambing of your sheep. Blessed be the basket and your kneading trough. Blessed be you when you come home, and blessed when you go forth. See, I have placed in front of you today both life and good, both death and ill, commanding today to love the boundless One, your God, to walk in ways I have ordained, keeping the commandments, laws, and judgments, so that you survive and multiply. The bountiful your God will bless you on the land you are about to enter and inherit. But if your heart should turn away, and you do not heed and go astray, and you submit to other gods and serve them, I declare to you today that you shall be destroyed completely. You shall not live out a great expanse of days upon the land that you now cross the Jordan to possess. I call as witnesses concerning you both heaven and earth, both life and death, that I have placed in front of you a blessing and a curse. Choose life, that you may live, you and your seed. Continue on 291. Deborah, if you lead us on the Nihamocha.
שיבחו גאולים לשבחה שפת הים יחד כלמדו וימחו ויאמרו אדוני הוא לעולם ועד בבשרו זו ישראל ומה בעזרת ישראל ובדמך יהודה וישראל גואלנו Kadosh Yisrael, Baruch Atah Adonai Yisrael.
For the Amida, on page 295, we're all rising. Let us continue that silently. Turning back to page 307. And Bishamru.
Shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם והניף בני ישראל אותי לעולם כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ וביום השביעי שבת וינפש וביום השביעי שבת וינפש
Okay, continuing on page 321 with Sim Shalom. And now I want to volunteer to do the Kaddish. We do the Sim Shalom?
Sim shalom, sim shalom tova uvracha. Sim shalom tova uvracha. Chen v'chesed v'rachamim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael amecha. Varchenu avinu kulanu kecha bior panecha. Sim shalom, sim shalom, sim shalom tova uvracha. Sim shalom tova uvracha. Ki bior panecha natzata lanu Adonai Eloheinu Torat chaim ve'ahavat chesed tzedaka u'bracha ve'rachamim ve'chaim ve'shalom. Sim shalom, sim shalom, sim shalom tova u'bracha. Sim shalom tova u'bracha. וטוב בעיניך לברך את עמך, לברך ישראל, ולכל העמים בעוז ושלום. שים שלום, שים שלום, שים שלום טובה וברכה. שים שלום טובה וברכה.
Thank you. Would someone please, on 381, read the Kaddish for the end of this section of the prayers?
Yikadav Yikadash Shanei Rabbah. Yamad Yibrach, Eretev Yamlik Malkotei, B'chayakon of Yomekon of Chay, the whole Beit Yisrael, Ba'agalo, Bizman Kari, Imaru. Yitbarach, V'yishtabach, V'yitbar, V'yitraham, V'yitnaseh, V'yitadar, V'yitale, V'yitalal, Shemei Kodeshah. La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tush b'chata v'nechamata, da'amiran be'alma v'imaru. Ti kabal salot honu v'ot honu kol beit Yisrael, chadam avuhon di v'shmaya v'imaru. Yehei shalom arabam v'in shemaya v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imaru. V'osei shalom v'imaru ma'achu yasei shalom aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al v'imaru.
Amen.
Thank you. Okay, we will go into the Torah service, and Sam has offered to help us since it's needed, right? Okay? We'll get the Torah out.
Not yet, page 383. And come on,
Adonai Yivarech et amo b'shalom. Aharachamim Eitira b'rtzoncha et Zion. Tivnei chomot Yerushalayim. Tivnei chomot Yerushalayim. Ki becha levad batachnu. Melech eram v'nisa Adon olamim. Vayehi b'nso Aharon vayomer Moshe.
Kula Adonai ve'afutzu oivecha ve'yanusu misanecha mipanecha ki mitzion tetzei Torah ki mitzion tetzei Torah Ula Adonai miYerushalayim Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Le'amo Yisrael B'Kedushato.
Page 393.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
We can do Adonai Sundress.
Adonai Hagidul, Hagidul, Hatiferet, Ve'anetzach ve'ahod, Ki kol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz, Ki kol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz. Lecha Adonai, ha'ma'bracha, Yamid na'aseh lecho eros. Adonai Eloheinu, V'nishtachavu le'Hadon Kadosh. Romenu, Adonai Eloheinu, V'nishtachavu le'Har Kodesh. Yikadosh Adonai Eloheinu.
You may be seated. Please let us know if you do not have a chumash. We are going to be beginning our Torah reading this morning on page 727. We are in Parshat Emor, which excitingly has a historic relevance for our Torah reader this morning. It was her bat mitzvah Torah portion. Woohoo!
Mazel tov.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. And actually, we're going to read a earlier section.
Great.
Yes, page 717.
We're reading 717.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. That is fine.
But it is, yes, the anniversary of my bat mitzvah.
That's so cool.
I won't say what year.
Maybe in a different year, it's a blessing.
Amen.
All right, so again,
Maybe one more. Maybe one more. I think this one.
Yes, there it is. Okay,
Thank you.
I'll hold this side, probably want this. our first Aliyah this morning. Harriet and Tony, who've done such a beautiful job leading us in worship, will you come up and do the blessing for this night for Torah? You don't want to. Okay. Harriet, would you like to? No? Okay. Then, David, would you like to do our first Aliyah? The blessing for the Torah is on page 399. There is a tradition in the Reconstructionist movement to not focus on the chosenness of the Jewish people, and so the bracha is a little bit bigger. No, you're just going to do the blessing, and you could choose to use the words that are in the Siddur in the Reconstructionist tradition, or in the more traditional tradition, that would be Asher Bachar Bani Kol Hanu. It's up to you, just to confuse you.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kirvanu la'ahavato v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Amen. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, Emor el Kohanim b'nei Aharon, ve'amarta alehem, lenefesh lo yitama be'amav, ki im l'saro hakarov elav, le'imo ule'aviv, ulivno, ulevivto, ule'achiv, ule'achto habetula hakrova elav, asher lo haita le'ish, la yitameh, lo yitama be'al be'amav lehechalo, lo yikrefu korcha berosham, ufa'et ziknam lo yigalechu, uviv saram lo yisritu saratet, kedoshim yihiyu lelohechem, velo yechalelu shem Elohechem, ki et ishe Adonai lachem Elohechem, hem makrivim v'hayu kadosh.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'hayev olam nota b'tehenu. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Our second Aliyah is going to continue on verse 7 on page 718. And Joe, we spoke a little bit this morning about the Levi'im and the honor and tradition it is to be passed down in a family. Would you like to do our second Aliyah?
Oh, here.
Yeah.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kirvanu la'avodato v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Isha zona v'chalela lo yikachu, ve'isha grusha me'isha lo yikachu, ki kadosh hu le'elohav, v'kidashto, ki et lechem Elohecha, hu makriv, kadosh yulach, ki kadosh ani Adonai mekadeshem, uvat ish kohen, ki tachal liznot, et avia hi machalatet, ba'esh tisaref.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chai olam natan b'dercheinu. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Our reading continues on page 718 in verse 10. Godfrey, I don't get to do this very much. Would you like to do our third Aliyah?
Sure.
And this time I'll call everybody your name if you want.
No problem.
Ya'amod,
Gavri Tov,
Gavri Tov,
Ben Mordechai Tzvi,
Ben Mordechai Tzvi,
Bela Elka.
Rebbeinu Elka Shlishi.
Baruch Hu Adonai Hamborach.
Baruch Adonai Hamborach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamborach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher קרבנו לעבודתו, ונתן לנו את תורתו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen. Amen. והכהן הגדול מאחיו, אשר יוצק על ראשו, שמן המשקע ומלא את ידו, ללבוש את הבגדים את ראשו, לא יפרע ובגדיו, לא יפרם, ועל כל נפשט, מת לא יבוא לאביו ולאמו, לא יטמא ומן המקדש, לא יצא ולא יחלל את מקדש אלוהיו, כי נזר שמן משחת אלוהיו עליו. אני אדוני והוא אישה בבתולה ייקח, אלמנה וגרושה וחללה זנה את אלה לא ייקח, כי אם בתולה מעמיו ייקח אישה ולא יחלל זרו בעמיו, כי אני אדוני מקדשו.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נטע בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
To Sam for a beautiful reading. Thank you. We are going to continue with Chatzi Kaddish on page 405. Please rise. יקדש שמי רבה, יומץ יברח לרצם לתמוך רוצה
יפתח ימך ולך בית ישראל, ובזמן קוראים אמרו אמן, וישמרך ומבורך, ועולם לעולם יומיים יתברך.
יתברך וישתבח, יתברך ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויזכר, ויתאבד, ויזכר, שמי קדושו, לעילם עם כל ברכתה ושירתה,
תשבחתה ונחמתה, תמירון בעלמי, אמרו אמן.
We're going to continue on page 407. Tony's voice may be a little weaker today, but his arms are still just as strong. So he is going to lift our Torah. Come sit down over here. And Stephanie, would you like to help us the Torah?
וזאת התורה אשר שם משה לפני בני ישראל בידוני ביד משה. תורה 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 ציווה לנו משה. Torah, 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 ציווה לנו משה. Torah, 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 ציווה לנו משה. Torah, 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 ציווה לנו משה.
Okay. Is your tradition for someone to hold it or just put it down? Okay, please be seated once the Torah is seated. Thank you.
Tony's going to lead a discussion
Yes.
with us, and we'll hope his voice lasts.
So, hello and good morning again, everybody.
Good morning.
So yes, I'm breaking my vow of silence to present this portion of the Torah. So today's parsha is Amor. It's the 31st weekly Torah portion in the 8th book of Leviticus, the book of the Levites. Basically, the parsha describes the purity rule for priests, recounts the holy days, describes the preparations for lights and bread in the sanctuary, and tells the story of the blasphemer and his punishment. The Parsha is comprised of 7 readings, and I'll run through them to give some context. The first reading, God tells Moses to tell the priests the priestly laws, for example, not to come into contact with the dead, not to shave beards, not to marry a harlot or divorcee. The daughter of a priest who becomes a harlot was to be executed. An instruction we'll come back to later. According to the second reading, no disabled priest could offer sacrifice. No priest who had become unclean could eat meat of sacrifice. A priest could not share his sacrificial meat with lay persons. However, the priest could share that meat with his slaves and widowed or divorced daughters if those daughters had no children. If they did, then sharing was forbidden. In the third reading, where we learn that only animals without defects qualify for sacrifice. Fourth reading, God told Moses to instruct the Israelites to proclaim the Sabbath on the 7th day, Pesach for 7 days beginning at the twilight of the 14th day of the month, Shavuot 50 days later. In the fifth reading, the Israelites are instructed to proclaim Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. On the sixth reading, it concludes the sacred occasions with Sukkot for 8 days beginning on the 15th day of the 7th month. And in the seventh and final reading, God told Moses to command the Israelites to bring clear olive oil for lighting the lamps of the tabernacle, and 12 loaves to be placed in the tabernacle every Sabbath for the priests. Finally, we learn that a man with an Israelite mother from the tribe of Dan and an Egyptian father got in a fight with an Israelite man, pronounced God's name in blasphemy. The people brought him to Moses and placed him in custody until God's decision could be made clear. God told Moses to take the blasphemer outside of camp, where all who heard him were to lay their hands upon his head, and the whole community was to stone him, and they did. God instructed that anyone who blasphemed God was to be put to death. Anyone who murdered any human being was to be put to death. One who killed a beast was to make restitution, and anyone who maimed another person was to pay proportionally. So, amor means literally to speak, but in some ways you get the feeling that the less said about it, the better. That there are many parts of the portion that rub our modern sensibility the wrong way. The discrimination against disabled priests, against daughters of priests with children, the instructions for sacrificing animals, the perhaps self-serving proclamation that priests should be brought meat and bread. For this reason, when I looked over the commentaries, a disproportionate amount focused on a relatively narrow strip of the Parsha lying at its periphery that contains an instruction more in keeping with our modern sensibilities. Does anybody know what I'm alluding to? Again, that small portion of the Parsha, again, sort of at its periphery of the body of the work, that, as I say, is more in keeping with our modern sensibilities. Rabbi, do you have any idea what I'm referring to?
I'm curious to hear.
Okay, so yes,
You mean the repetition of the Lex Talionis?
No, I'm getting to that. Rather, what I found a lot of mention of in the commentaries is the instruction: when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the edges of your field. When gathering of gleanings of your harvest, you shall leave them for the poor and stranger. I, the Eternal One, am your God. Yeah. That's a small section of it, which is really a small section of one's land. So, here we have the idea, complementing the idea of the Sabbath, which is to reserve a small part of time for yourself, to reserve a small part of land for others. And I think this idea of generosity and donation and caring for those less fortunate is one of the most important ideas in the Parsha, and perhaps one of the most important ideas in the entire Torah. Nevertheless, I do not intend to concentrate my discussion on that worthy idea. Rather, I'm sort of interested in talking about the narrative of the blasphemer. And this is something that interested me because I have a general interest in the criminal law. So aside from the narrative of the blasphemer, there's only one other narrative in the entire book of Leviticus. Does anybody know what that is? I mean, mostly Leviticus is a statement of laws and instructions, but there are these one or two brief stories.
In Shmini? With father and son?
Yes, that's right. That's right. The death of Nabab and Abihu in chapter 10. And this narrative makes some sense to be in Leviticus, because Leviticus is about priests and the Levites. So the story of the death of Nabab and Abihu makes some sense to be there. But the story of the blasphemer seems to have no direct connection to any priestly laws or priestly activities. So what's it all about? What's it doing there? Well, I looked through myjewishlearning.com, and there were 23 commentaries there, including by the one by Rabbi Albert, which I found very interesting. However, not a single one of them focused on the narrative of the blasphemer. So one role of this story seems to be, I think, to be a vehicle or provide an occasion to introduce the general rules of punishment. These are sometimes summarized by the formula an eye for an eye, or to use the Latin term, lex talionis, literally the law of retaliation. Now, this idea of lex talionis arises in three other places in the Torah: in Exodus chapter 21, earlier in Leviticus, and later in Deuteronomy chapter 19. So, lex talionis has a reputation as a sort of primitive, bloodthirsty principle, but it can be understood, I think, more progressively. It can be understood first to create a principle of proportionality of punishment. That is, the lesser transgression, the lesser sanction that would follow upon that. Furthermore, it also is a limiting principle, that no punishment should be done that is greater than the harm that occasioned it. Thus, contrary to many existing codes and laws at the time, it was a limiting doctrine. Many codes at the time, for all offenses, the punishment was death. Here, merely an eye for an eye. Certainly, it's a principle that today might be given more scope. For example, there are many crimes today that, according to our penal codes, there's a punishment that exceeds the lex talionis principle. The punishment for drug offenses, for possession as opposed to the manufacture of child pornography, 3 strike laws, the offenses for theft, prosecution for many property crimes, and all of these, I think, our criminal justice system itself might be made more humane if it were to adhere to the principle of lex talionis. And to continue with some kind words towards this superficially harsh, dark doctrine, I don't believe it needs to be construed as an unbending or absolute moral principle. For example, I think that lex talionis is consistent with a robust theory of excuses or defenses. I don't think it needs to be applied, for example, to the insane, because they are not responsible for the harms they do. I think it's consistent, again, with mitigating principles of lesser responsibility, of mitigating principles of circumstances and other factors that prevent one from being maximally responsible for the actions we take, if we ever are. Furthermore, I think it's appropriate to understand it at a level of abstraction. Literally, the harm one causes another cannot be visited on the agent, because the harm occurs to another at a point in the past in many specific circumstances. So practically it has to be understood at some level of abstractness. So perhaps we can think of, for an I, a deprivation of liberty to the extent that may be proportional to that. I found at a Reconstructionist website the following commentary. Although it has been derided over the centuries by misinformed readers for its seemingly harsh demands of absolute retribution, it was clearly intended as a humane innovation in human history designed to limit the retribution of one individual or family or clan against the other to be clearly defined, limited, and fair response. In the biblical world, the retribution for one person injuring another depended upon who did the harm to whom: a slave to master, a citizen to a stranger, a poor person to a rich one, and someone in the weaker social category to be killed for causing almost any injury to someone of higher social class. The biblical authors boldly stand up for equality before the law, fairness among all in society, and ultimately for substituting monetary compensation, much like insurance does today, in place of actually physically harming the guilty party. Beyond the notion of limiting the damages one could extract upon another to monetary equivalent of the damage inflicted, the law of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was an innovation of ethical law fundamentally rooted in the Jewish notion that all human beings are created in the image of God and therefore must be treated with dignity and respect regardless of the social status, gender, or economic standing in community. But to return to the vehicle that was an occasion to take us to the principle of lex talionis, does anything strike you as incongruous about the story of the blasphemer as an occasion to introduce the notion of lex talionis? Again, of course, the blasphemer is somebody who it's unclear whether he simply used the name of God or cursed God from the text. There's certainly an ambiguity there. His punishment was being stoned by the community as a whole. Does that strike anybody as incongruous with the idea of lex talionis? Yeah, Sam?
It feels disproportionate.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely it does. I mean, using God's name, God is a omnipotent, all-powerful ruler of the universe. You figure he could probably, take a little whipping without great offense or without great harm, and yet we find, the punishment we are presented with is death for this.
But isn't that because he didn't repent? When he had been offered an opportunity to repent, to take back the words and everything else, and if he didn't, that would be the only reason they would do it.
Right. Well, in fact, we do find in the Torah instances of people doing things that would strike us as more transgressive than simply, using, pronouncing God's name in inappropriate circumstances. There are cases of Israelites who defect to worship other deities, but to quote a commentary, yet full-blooded Israelites who time and time again worship other gods, including multiple instances in Exodus and Numbers, the books that flank Leviticus, and then in Judges and Kings, are invariably pardoned upon repentance, and sometimes even without it, as it seems to be the case in Judges. So worse things are done, and yes, sometimes there's repentance, sometimes there might not be. It's not clear in this story that he was given a chance and refused to. So so my question is, what can we make of this? Is it consistent with the idea of lex talionis?
Not about lex talionis, but you think of the big narrative of the Exodus. Like anybody who left Egypt never made it to Israel. That there's a whole new generation born, and this is you can interpret what happened here as just this God choosing to. He's like wiping that slate. He I want X people continuing this journey. This person's not one of them. And just this idea of whatever, I don't even call it purity or whatever you want to call it, like whatever ideal that is. And maybe that's why you think back to even like the golden calf and the punishment for that. Like these punishments are extreme. And I was just like reading the commentary here. It wasn't just stoning. It was like they said that the interpretation is that like first the person was pushed down off of something twice their height, then stoned, only if they didn't die after being pushed down twice their height, and after the stoning they were hung. And if you read it that way, that's intense. So I think the idea is they're really trying to it's our way or the highway.
Yeah, well, obviously, yeah, Joe.
I was going to say that, the word blasphemy is a little difficult to understand. We only use it on rare occasions and we don't really know what it means. The Hebrew words that are used for what this person did, if he did anything, those too are rather hard to understand. And you never know if the Torah is being metaphorical or not, so who knows? Maybe the punishment of stoning was metaphorical. The one thing I like about the lex talionis is that it always reminds me of every time I read about a road rage revenge incident, I think, somebody cut you off, you really have to shoot them dead because of that?
Mm-hmm. And also when I hear about these road rage incidents, it's sort of like, you cut me off, but I started to cut you off, and then you started yelling at me, I started to yell at you. Things slowly, escalate, and somebody, pulls out a knife, pulls out a gun, and then before you know it, and I have to admit, sort of at a gut level, I think, one of you sort of deserved it some. You in many of these cases, both are aggressors. They're both very aggressive people who are not, refusing to back down, and they're getting a little of what they are willing to give. You only have these incidents when you have, two people again who are highly aggressive. Not the only time, but I think there's a category of cases in which this is what is happening. In that there's perhaps a touch of poetic justice in that. So, yeah.
I think one of the complications, of course, as you're addressing is identifying the injured party. Is it actually God who is the injured party in a case of blasphemy? Or is it the community itself?
Right. So
because if the harm done is to every member of the community, that is a huge crime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can think of this as something public, in the modern counterpart might be a public order offense, doing something that, that disturbs the community as a whole. I think that's one way you can conceive of it. You can also think of it, in question whether, still such a public offense, public order offense, deserves, the highest penalty. You can think of it a little bit like, and under English common law, the greatest crime was not homicide. There was one crime considered greater than that. Anybody have a guess what that might have been?
Was that les majesté?
Yeah?
Was it?
Yes, what does that mean?
You know, being insufficiently respectful of the monarch.
Yeah, well, I was thinking of treason.
Oh,
Treason
I'm sorry, you're right.
traditionally
Yeah,
was the greatest crime.
Oh, yeah.
It was a crime not against a person, but the state itself,
Yeah.
like that entity that in fact gave law. It was sort of a crime against law itself.
Right.
And for that reason, it could be thought of as the highest wrong. I mean, likewise, you might think here that, you know, denial of the lawgiver, right, God,
Yes,
is
yes,
the
yes.
is
Right.
in a way an offense against all the laws simultaneously.
That's a
Right.
good point.
Makes
Yeah.
me think of like a situation where somebody does something wrong, maybe specifically towards like X person, whatever, but because that person was in like a leadership role or something, that it actually has like a traumatic trickle down to the greater community. So even though like on the books, it looks like he just did one thing, it's really like if you look at the big umbrella picture, and I'm wondering if blasphemy is kind of like that in the sense of like it was one single event, but just the effect of it is massive.
So I'd like to thank you all for these comments, but now I'd like to talk a little bit about one of the, and I'll try not to use up too much time, but one of the interpretations that I encountered when I was reading the commentaries, and one theory is that this narrative is really about conflicts between insiders and outsiders. The blasphemer is described solely as the son of a Jewish woman and an Egyptian man, right? No name is given, nothing else in the background. This is how he is presented, and the person he has the conflict with, who he strives against, some brawl, is described simply as an Israelite man. So it's the son of an Egyptian and a Jewish woman versus an Israelite man. And, we're given, we're obviously not given very much background about the nature of the conflict between the two, but when it says that son of an Israelite woman whose father was Egyptian went out among the children of Israel, there is ambiguity there, what it means to go out among the children, but one interpretation is that it means he was entering into the Jewish camp, rather than simply already being in the camp and leaving his tent and going out. And if somebody with a incomplete Jewish background comes into a Jewish camp, why is he doing it? Well, perhaps to assert his right to be within the camp, and then you have a full-blooded Israelite. They enter into a brawl. It was, very possibly a plausible interpretation over his right to be in there, and the objection of the full-blooded Israelites to his being there.
The objection was that, see, he was born of a Jewish mother, and you take the tribe of your father, so he had no tribe. And they said he was trying to enter the tribe of Dan. I assume his mother was probably from the tribe of Dan.
Yes.
And they were denying him that.
Exactly.
And he got pissed.
So what you have here is really a conflict between an outsider and an insider, between the have-nots and the haves, between perhaps parallel to immigrants and natives. One person trying to come in and claim some right to be there, and another saying, no, you don't have that right. So what happens? Well, some brawl ensues. We don't know actually who began it, who was the more aggressive party, whether either had some claim to self-defense, whether they were equally wrong in this conflict. We don't get any of that. What does happen is apparently some witnesses, some observers, identify the outsider as blaspheming God, and so they use that as an opportunity to haul him before the authorities. In some sense, it feels so very much like, to me, like selective prosecution, that here we don't know really who is wrong or right, but we can pull this guy out because he did this. He used God's name inappropriately, which in the context of a fight, again, we don't know whether he said, merely something like, God damn it, or, God damn your God, we don't know, but it certainly is easy to imagine that terms like this would be used when two people are brawling. So again, it sort of feels like an excuse to grab one of the parties, the outsider party. One commentator writes, to be sure, the deity does proclaim that both resident alien and citizen should be executed for blasphemy. But is it an accident that the only actual case of such an execution involves someone who is, in all likelihood, not a citizen? He's taken before Moses. So again, it sort of, feels to me like, cases of, civil rights protesters who were found to, violate some obscure law against trespass or congregating without an appropriate permit. Seems somewhat, is a trumped up instance to take somebody away.
But
then he is.
Why do you think there was a distinction being made from him as thinking of him as part of the mixed multitude as being an outsider as opposed to just for his actions alone? Why do you think it's just because he was a stranger as opposed to just his actions?
Right. Well, as I said, we can only sort of read into what's going on here about the nature of what the conflict might be, but just sort of thinking about it based upon our experience, you can easily imagine two people fighting, and the observers, who obviously are on the side of the local, using this as an occasion to distinguish between the two of them, again, to haul him off. So this is interpretation and speculation, granted.
There is a lot of backstory in the Midrash, but the one thing that strikes me is that if you're descended, if your mother is part of the community, but your father is not part of the community, then you are not going to inherit a patch of land when you get to the land. And that, you can imagine somebody growing up becoming aware of that and how difficult it would be to live that way and say, here I am, I'm with all these people, but I'm not going to get my bit.
So he is, he's taken off to Moses, and he's not immediately executed. Like, what happens according to the story? He goes before
prison for a while.
Him to Moses, his mother's name was Shalomith.
Right, he's held apparently in custody for Moses to decide what is to become of him.
And
so apparently there is this prohibition in effect about about using God's name inappropriately, but the punishment for it hasn't been established. Moses has to look to God to ask him what should we do with this person, and then he receives the instructions that blasphemers be put to death, an eye for an eye, a wrong for a wrong, a breach for a breach, and so forth. So, to me, as having a background in criminal law, this offends a principle of due process, the way things occur. It is inconsistent with a very sort of well-established legal maxim, the idea that a person's punishment is only determined after they engage in the transgression. Anybody know what the Latin phrase is for this?
Ex post facto.
Ex post facto, exactly. Very good. The ex post facto principle has two parts. One is that no conduct may be declared criminal after it's engaged in, but also that no punishment may be set for conduct already determined to be illegal after the conduct has been engaged in. So you might wonder, well, why is this? I mean, obviously, the first part of the principle is people have to know what's wrong in order to have a fair opportunity to avoid engaging in it. But once you know that something is wrong, that you shouldn't blaspheme, what's the importance of having a punishment established beforehand? I mean, you've already been given appropriate notice on what you need to know to get along, so why should there be this prohibition on establishing a punishment that applies retroactively?
But first of all, it's the second one, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. And so this is part of what the blasphemy is. And then this was the first case, it's the first case of first impression, just like the Supreme Court, they get cases of first impression. So you gotta decide, based upon your understanding of the law, how it fits into the situation. So they said, well, we don't know how to deal with it, so they went to God, and God said, look, this is the way you deal with punishment. So that's nothing new, that's the whole process of law. At some point, you have to interpret the law to fit a situation, and how do you apply it in that situation?
Well, actually, I mean, in legal doctrine, a distinction is made. The ex post facto doctrine only applies to statutorily created law. It doesn't apply to judge-made law. So when a judge interprets the law in a novel way, it's considering just to declare the prior existing law rather than creating a new law might be created by statute. But in any case, I think that the reason for this ex post facto, the second part of the ex post facto, is that we are concerned with the possibility of abuse. That is, there's a violation of the law, and now what should the punishment be? We're concerned that the punishment might inappropriately be set because of the specifics of the occasion for the transgression. And that is, we want the punishment set beforehand, somewhat in a veil of ignorance, right? And abstractly not knowing the particular participants, because that makes the punishment more principled, as opposed to doing it later in hindsight where we see who we're going to be punishing. And of course, here it is an outsider, a man who is only half Jewish. And so I think we can sort of generally understand the whole narrative, I think, as a cautionary tale about how laws that on the books might seem acceptable and justifiable, how in practice they can be used against particular individuals, those who, again, we don't want and we don't understand as part of our community.
But look, we just read, he said you can't judge anybody according to their position, whether they're rich or they're poor. So I don't understand that argument with respect to this thing, because you're just trying to sort out how you apply the law, because this is the second trial. The first was the guy who broke the Shabbat, who went out and gathered Omer Mana on the Shabbat, and they put him in ward, and they asked God what was the punishment, and that was the first time. This is the second trial, as they try to apply the law in society. And I still don't think it was because he's just supposedly half a Jew.
Yeah, it seems to me that, when you say that the Torah is a book of harsh punishment, it turns out that there are only 2 judicial executions in the Torah, and both times nobody knows what to do. They have to go and ask the top boss, what are we supposed to do?
Tony, thank you for bringing that. And in the discussion, you've actually led me to think about a lot of things happening today that have to do with punishment, have to do with juvenile justice, and the fact that we are looking today at a whole lot of stuff of like 17-year-olds who assisted in some kind of crime, having spent 35 years in prison, and all those issues. So I think some of us have to think about how this does have some meaning and interpretation for today. And I want to thank you, and we need to get on with our services.
And thank you.
We can have time to talk, because I don't want to carry any of that home. Okay. If we could basically,
Okay, so I think we go on to page 418.
Okay. Page 418. Actually, since a lot of what we did today certainly had relevance for our country, and definitions of road rage and march rage and a whole lot of stuff like that. I was going to close our discussion with a prayer for our country, and to some extent I think this is one that fits parts of our world as well. I'm just going to read it, and then we'll put the Torah away. Page 418. Sovereign of the universe, mercifully receive our prayer for our land and its government. Let your blessing pour out on this land and on all officials of the country who are occupied in good faith with the public needs. Instruct them from your Torah's laws. Enable them to understand your principles of justice so that peace and tranquility, happiness and freedom might never turn away from our land. Please, wise one, God of the life breath of all flesh, waken your spirit within all inhabitants of our land, and plant among the peoples of different nationalities and faiths who dwell here love and brotherhood, peace and friendship. Uproot from their hearts all hatred and enmity, all jealousy and vying for supremacy. Fulfill the yearning of all the people of our country to speak proudly in its honor. Fulfill their desire to see it become a light to all nations. Therefore, may it be your will that our land should be a blessing to all the inhabitants of the globe. Cause to dwell among all peoples friendship and freedom, and soon fulfill the vision of your prophet. Let's all say that. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation. Let them learn no longer ways of war. And let us say, Amen. I think that prayer is very needed today in our country and in our world. If we look at the Ukraine and so Russia and what's happening in our world today. Okay, putting the Torah away. Okay.
441.
Okay. And then you need to put the Torah away.
It's Chaim Lama Chazim Kima V'tocheha Meushar Deracheha Darchei Noam V'chol Netivoteha Shalom Hashivenu Adonai Elecha Nashuva Chadish Chadish Yameinu Chadish Yameinu Kekedem.
Let's go on with the Mishabera. Okay. Do we have some names from the congregation in general? I know sometimes you do have even a list.
I often have a list. I don't have a list today, so I just invite folks to share names if they wish.
Paul et al. He's not here today, but we are having some visual problems that we hope will go away. Okay. Any other comments?
My mother, Elaine Dilloff, who has COVID but is doing better.
Okay. John Gustafson, our friend, who double boosted, double shots, and still got COVID from someplace that he was in. So I'm glad we all stayed with our masks today.
And my very best friend, Golda Bat Svi Hirsch-Bepini, otherwise known as my spouse.
Got Leah Bat Makeda, and Richard Ben Leah, and Miriam Bat Leah.
Judy Weidenborn, my aunt, she's in the ICU, but she's doing fairly well.
And all those who may be in our hearts and in our heads but are not coming to our lips. Mishabera, it's on page either 684 or in the back of the book. But I think we all know that with Gary's help.
Mishabera,
to share the positives as well as the ones worrying about those who are ill and momentarily after those who we are mourning. But do we have some things to say that are sharing positives in our lives? Anybody?
The downtown synagogue is going to begin construction on our new building on June 6th.
Whoa. Can't hide it.
I'm going to do a personal one. On June the 12th, the Jewish Historical Society of Michigan will be honoring me as the History Maker of the Year, the Leonard Simons History Maker of the Year.
Wonderful.
Along with Arthur Horowitz, who should have received that award last week. We'll have a brunch under the bleachers at the former Tiger Stadium. That's where it'll be. It's an outside one. It's free if anybody is interested in the Jewish Historical Society of Michigan. And that afternoon is finally the memorial celebration of Carl Levin's life, starting at 1 o'clock at Wayne State University. Fortunately, they're both the same day, but I recommend anybody who can go to the Carl Levin one. I think that's far more important because we have someone who was a member of our congregation and the downtown congregation who basically should have his life celebrated for what he did for the community, for the world, and for life in general. So
And
June
the
12th
window.
is a very special day on a
And the
Sunday.
window.
And the window.
Anyone else? Come on, we have some other happy things to share.
We're in this space again
Yeah.
after 2 years.
Then those things are in your hearts and heads, but not in your lips. Let's go on. And together, if we would say this prayer, the Shekeanu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Shekeanu v'yihanu v'yideinu b'zman b'zeh. I like to say it in English. Blessed are you, our God, creator of time and space, who has supported us, protected us, and brought us to this moment. We are here today. Those of us here, I'm glad to have us all here. Masked or not, we're at least together in one space. Okay, we're going to go into 443. Gabri's going to help us.
En Kadoshenu, En Kadoshenu, En Kemakeinu, En Kemoshienu. Isn't that everyone? Mich Eloheinu, Mich Adonenu, Mich Kemakeinu, Mich Kemoshienu.
Okay, on page 444.
Before we do the Aleinu, may I offer one
Please,
additional prayer?
yeah.
Okay, on page 420, the prayer for the state of Israel. Sur Tefilat Midnat Yisrael, rock and champion of Israel, please bless the state of Israel, first fruit of the flowering of our redemption. Guard in it the abundance of your love, spread over it the shelter of your peace. Send forth your light and truth to those who lead it and judge it, and to those who hold elected office. Establish in them, through your presence, wise counsel, that they may walk in the way of justice, freedom, and integrity. Strengthen the hands of those who guard our holy land. Let them inherit salvation and life. Give peace to the land and perpetual joy to its inhabitants. Appoint as for a blessing to all of our kindred, the house of Israel, in all the lands of their dispersion. Plant in their hearts a love of Zion. And for all our people everywhere, may God be with them. May they have the opportunity to go up to the land. Cause your Spirit's influence to emanate upon all dwellers of the Holy Land. Remove from their midst hatred and enmity, jealousness and wickedness. Plant in their hearts love, kinship, peace, and friendship. And soon fulfill the vision of your prophet. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation. Let them learn no longer the ways of war. And let us say, Amen. Thank you.
Let us leave the Aleinu and do the Mourner's Kaddish, and then we'll do the Aleinu after that.
We're doing Aleinu.
Well, Aleinu first, 444.
Yeah.
Okay?
שלא שמתי הרצון,
ולא שמענו כמשפחות האדמה,
שלא שם כלפינו בהם, וגורלנו ככל עמונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נותן שמיים ויוסד הארץ, ומשב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגבהי מרומי, הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, כך כתוב בתורתו, ידעת היום והשבות אל לבבך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים, בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת, אין עוד.
Rabbi Eliana?
Do you want to finish on 449?
כך כתוב
בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד שמו אחד.
Thank you, Harriet. The downtown synagogue continues to mourn the losses in the past 11 months of the Honorable Abram Cohn, husband of Lois Cohn, Gerald Levine, husband of Lynn Levine, Matt Fishman, father of Jody Fishman Rains, husband of Lois Fishman, and grandfather of Isla and Zoe Rains, Gerald Lax, a longtime member of the congregation, Jude Sopko, mother of Jillian Sopko, grandmother of Isabella Walker, Pinchas Barak, husband of Miriam Barak, father of Lior Barak, the Honorable Carl Levin, husband of Barbara Levin, and Thelma Bell, mother of Anita Bell. We commemorate the yard sites this week of Robert Long, Ann Oser, Jack Tobias, Eugene Citron, Joyce Spiegel, Richard Harris, Harry T. Ross, Gail Bendit, Bertha Fisher, Louis Gadon, Peter Kuzner, Bernice Booker, and David Brody.
From any members of the congregation that would like to add some names for your site? Yes, please, go ahead.
My grandmother Rosemarie Zubal Castronova and my aunt Cynthia Chirafonders.
My sister Karen.
To your side of my brother, Dr. Bertram Brown.
My dear friend Robin Gillespie.
And all those whose names are in our hearts, our heads, but don't come to our lips this morning. And all those who are dying in the war that should not be taking place, but is. Okay? Yigadal, Yigadash, Shemir, Rabba, Yalmad, Dibrach, Yotei, Yamelech, Malkutei, V'Hayon, Ulamechon, V'Hayei, Topol, Beit Israel, V'Adalah, Uzman, Kari, V'Imru,
Amen.
Yehesh, Me, Rabba, Barak, Lamameh, Yitbarach, Yishtabach, Yitparar, Yitrumam, Yitnaseh, Yishadar, Yithaleh, Yithalal, Shemei, Kudishah, V'Elam, Mikol, Mirchatav, Surachah, Tush B'Chachav, Nechamatem, Ram, Yalam, Yehesh, Lam, Rabba, Shemaiah, V'Elam, Kol, Yisrael, Aseh Shalom, Rabba, Yaseh Shalom, Elena, Yokol, Yisrael, Yokol, Yisrael, Tivel,
Amen.
Last of the day, so you can be seated on page 459. Adon, Gary, please help us.
Hashem Adonai, B'Shem Kol, Yitzir Ra, V'Lein Asa, V'Nasol, Azamelech, Shemo Nikra, V'Acharei, Yilat HaKol, Le'Adon, Yimlach
Shabbat shalom, hey, Shabbat shalom, hey. Thank everybody for coming to our
Yasher Koach.
service, and of course, let's give these continuing back.
Okay, well, I hope they'll find something.
Thanks very much.
Lovely discussion.